Right. So I'm going to hit record. You can, oh, you're already recording. That's cool.
Just started.
All right. So thanks for jumping on. I was having a bit of a chat with James last week, and we both quickly decided that it was worth us having another conversation and diving deeper into some of these key parts and kind of just a bit of a free flow back and forth. And I think the key focus or key the area that we wanted to really speak to was the concept of scaling up the sales arm of your business, the sales side of your business, which is such a fundamental part, but also such a part that can become very overwhelming or complicated or get put on the back burner very quickly. In a business that's growing with so many different hats you're wearing, so many different priorities, and really being able to build that solid foundation to continue growing the business and supporting that growth. So just to kick off, what we're going to do, James is going to run through a bit about himself. I'm going to run through a bit about myself, and then we're going to jump in and just have a bit of a conversation back and forth. So James, take it away.
Cool. Thanks, Cullen. Yeah, look, I don't want to kind of get bogged down in too much detail, but the background quite simply is that initially my very first career was in the military, and as a result of that, I got to see high-performing people in action and delivering spectacular results, often in the most adverse of circumstances, and that served a bit of a benchmark for me. It created an understanding of just what's possible. As I left the military and went into the corporate arena, what I was kind of confronted by was more of a subscription of, pardon the French, but same shit, different day. 9 to 5 to survive. Certainly near enough is good enough. And that kind of, I found that a little bit shocking. I didn't understand why it was that was the case. And ultimately that obviously comes down to leadership and those sorts of things. And it's also about the people that you're bringing into your business and whether or not they're actually the appropriate fit, not only for the role, but for your organizational culture, to kind of boil it down. So fast forward through that, over the last 20 years, I've built now 7 businesses across a range of different things. I owned a security company at one stage. I was co-owner of a sales training business for around 15 years, owned a leadership development business for about 13 years. And then more recently, what I've done, and based off a couple of different reasons, I've launched what's now turned out to be 4 different recruitment brands. And in particular, 3 out of those 4 focus exclusively on helping small business owners to recruit a particular sales role, whether it's their first salesperson. For another one of the businesses, we help them recruit their first sales manager. And then in another business which focuses in the real estate space, we're helping them recruit somebody who may be brand new into sales within the real estate space. And I work quite closely these days with small to medium-sized business owners who, to a large degree themselves, are the salesperson, and they're kind of begrudgingly the salesperson. It's, they started their business not with an intent of being in sales, but because they were deeply passionate about the thing that they do, and they probably do that very, very well. And then, inadvertently, they kind of find that they actually have to be a salesperson as well. So it's a bit about me. How about you, Cullen?
Perfect. So for me, a little bit of a different journey to the journey you've come along. I think I kind of started out wondering where my spot in the world was in a working capacity, at least, and just realizing that I had a certain set of skills that was quite kind of detail oriented, quite systematic, quite kind of process driven, or as opposed to plenty of entrepreneurs out there that are running companies that are, there's a lot of people that are big picture thinkers, quite strategic, great at getting started and getting things moving. And there's that concept of kind of like the visionary versus integrator. And I've kind of had to really develop and own the visionary side to support the integrator versus some other people are on the reverse of that. But for me, one of the kind of key chapters in developing and building to where we are now, prior to running the company, is my time when I was at NAB, and I worked on a project initially, then moved into a sales team, and that was a really cool experience. And I remember a mentor of mine at the time said, I was kind of talking to him about kind of working out what direction I was going to go in, and I sort of said to him, look, he was running a company of his own, and he's like, look, if you want to get into anything, get into sales. If there's one skill you can learn, you can focus on, make that sales, because sales is the cornerstone to so much. Sales is about the exchange of value. It's about the interaction. It's about understanding problems and challenges and solving those. Putting everything else aside, that is the core of what it is, and it's that exchange of value and solving problems and providing real solutions that actually matters. As that kind of starting point. And so for me, that was a journey at NAB in a business banking sales team, where I was working in a sales team. And what I realized very quickly, which is kind of the interesting side that I felt, was that I felt like I wasn't a good kind of natural salesperson. I wasn't that person that was incredibly charismatic. I wasn't that person that was really good at kind of talking or that natural ability to connect or build rapport. And they were skills that I had to learn throughout the years. But what I found very quickly was that I kind of worked out a really systematic way to approach that very early on, and was able to do really well purely based on being really methodical and systematic in my approach, and really measured in my approach as well. And that worked for me, and that worked incredibly well. And I was able to then kind of move up and have a real influence on the sales team, not only as a kind of, what do you call it, just basically someone that was able to know all the details of certain parts of it and have relationships with product teams and that sort of thing. And that allowed me to build my confidence in sales, because I got to understand it from a process perspective, talking with product teams. I had a lot to do with management and actually helped manage and run a sales team for a period of time, as well as got to be the salesperson. And I think the key piece there, and the skill that allowed me to nurture and further develop, was being able to understand the client or the customer, being able to understand from a business perspective, being able to understand it from a product perspective, and bring all those together, and also a technology perspective as well. And that is kind of the cornerstone or foundation of what we do today. It's being able to bring the ecosystem of everything that you're doing in sales to build the sales engine of the business. You need the right people, and that's where James is an expert. And complementary to that, having the systems, having the strategy, having the sales process, understanding your metrics around sales, looking at the data and analytics from that perspective, knowing some of the key systems you've got to put into play and at what time, and doing that in a way that's incredibly simple and lean and efficient, and allows you to remain profitable, where you're not going over the top because there's a lot of moving parts, but you're not also undercooking it or underdoing it, where you're kind of left wondering what to do. Like there's so many things you could do, and it's like, how do you get something that is enough, that gives you enough, that allows you to build scalability without going too far? And that's kind of that key spot that I love, and that's where we do a lot of work in. Right. As well as obviously dashboards and all the other tools that come into play, but they're all just tools on the tool belt, or pieces that really contribute to the bigger picture of scaling the sales side of the business. So yeah, that's kind of a bit about me. For yourself, James, just to kind of throw a question to you, talk to me about like finding the right people, because that's something that we see with a lot of clients. It's obviously a very common thing in regards to small business or your medium-sized businesses, where it's like they kind of get stuck in this spot of like, I need to hire a salesperson or another salesperson, but I don't really have the time, or where do I start, or we don't have some of the sales infrastructure or systems or process, etc., kind of in place. Like, talk to me about that. What have you seen, and what's really that key behind that?
Yeah, well, that game's really changed, and it's changed really with the advent of two things, essentially, internet and social. And, as a consequence of that, today, recruitment is, I would suggest, 1 part marketing and 3 parts behavioural science. I've got a little thing that I share with potential customers sometimes, called the 7 biggest mistakes that small business owners make when they're recruiting their sales professionals. The first of which is that they actually start recruiting when they need the person. It's too bloody late, particularly for small business owners, right? Because we're in a market today where employers, and particularly employers at the big end of town, have got this idea of employee engagement and employee experience. They get that. And so they're spending lots and lots and lots of money on making themselves attractive, not only to come along and join, but in fact to stay. And so for those of us at the small to medium end, we've got to fight that much harder for good quality talent. It's almost, we get the fish that John West rejected if we're not careful. And so, part of the journey is very much around, and HR people will talk about this thing called employer branding. Employer branding is more important for us in small business than it really is for the big end of town, because the big end of town, the brand name was already known, and that makes its own attraction. And so, as small business owners have got to be much, much, much more proactive in not only building their business brand, but also their employer brand. They've got to be thinking with both hats on if they're going to be able to bring the right people in. The other piece that has changed quite a lot, it's beginning to evolve. And I'll actually share some data with you from Harvard, which I found incredibly compelling when I began to toy with the idea of actually, launching a recruitment business at the time. So that was back in 2018. So it was a study completed by Harvard, which released in 2013. And what it revealed was that holy grail of recruitment, that is, the gold standard process of review a cover letter, review a resume, conduct a structured interview, maybe do a personality assessment and do reference checking. They've got what's referred to in psychological terms as a predictive reliability of 0.26. So if you do those 5 things that have always been, we've always been told that's recruitment, that's how you do recruitment, that's best practice recruitment. Well, it turns out your ability to rely on the data that you gather through that process is only 0.26, where the ideal number is 1. I mean, you literally are better off flipping a coin in terms of, guessing whether I choose that person or that person. So as a consequence, assuming that you've done all the right things to attract somebody in the first place, the mechanisms for discerning whether or not they are the right person, not only for the role, but for your organization, all of that's evolving now. So, where we've gone and where we're seeing a shift, and this is where you and I kind of resonated when we had our original conversation, is around this thing called data. We need to gather more and more data, and in particular, we need to gather data which is predictively reliable.
Mm-hmm.
So, yeah, there's an evolution happening there, which I have to say, I don't think too many recruitment firms are getting behind just yet. I think recruitment, almost like real estate, is almost in this stage of denial. Because it's a human thing. It's a human being assessing another human being, and humans will always need to be involved in it. Well, guess what? Human beings are fundamentally flawed. Subconscious bias. We buy into signals without even realize that we're buying into them.
Sure.
Particularly with sales roles, because traditionally a good salesperson will be a good conversationalist and a good communicator.
Yeah. So what would you say, and maybe you've got your own framework anyway, that you or specific number of points, but what are, say, the 3 key things that you would recommend someone who's kind of at that point where they're on the fence around hiring someone or finding someone or needing to bring someone on in the sales spot? What are the kind of 3 key areas or key things or key points they should really understand or focus on that can help them make that decision or get moving if that's the right timing?
Yeah. Essentially, mate, it's around what I describe as will do versus can do, right? Historically, when we've hired somebody, we've hired them because we've managed to convince ourselves they can do the job. We've looked at the resume, we've looked at the work history, we've interviewed them and we've given them scenarios, and they've been able to communicate through those scenarios convincingly. And so we've convinced ourselves that they can do the job. 6 months, 9 months later, after much frustration and hair pulling and sleepless nights, we finally let them go, not because they can't do the job, but because they won't do the job. Right? It's not in their nature to do the job in the way that we want it done. And I actually am a living, breathing example of this. So at one stage in my working career, towards the end of the 1990s, I joined what was considered to be one of the leading global sales training consultancy, a business called Mercury. We would run all sorts of different sales training programs, one of which was a cold calling program. Right? So we ran a workshop on effective cold calling. And I doubt that I hold it today, but at the time, I ended up setting a record where a group of people that I was training in a workshop who then got on the phones ended up with more appointments than had ever been secured as a result of one of these workshops. And 4 months later, the client was also able to share with us that they'd seen a significant spike in revenues. So can I cold call? Absolutely, I can. In fact, I can teach others how to cold call. will I cold call? Not a snowball's chance in hell. Right? It's crazy. I can jump out of a plane at 32,000 feet in the middle of the night and have a stupid grin on my face. Can I pick up a lump of plastic and ask somebody for an appointment? Scares the living daylights out of me. You know, it's just ridiculous.
Yeah.
You know, so can I do the job versus will I do the job? And so, you know, coming back to the question, ultimately for me, it's about getting absolute crystal clarity around what actual results has this person actually delivered, you know, to their previous employers, and making them quantify that and making them talk about that in detail. And in particular, one of the things that I'm very strong in getting them to do is to talk me through the client scenario. What was the client situation? And it's interesting the number of people that will tell you about their sales process, but who won't tell you because they can't tell you about their client situation, right? Yeah. The other side of that is then getting as close as you possibly can to getting the person to actually role model the job, right? To actually give them a day in the life of, you know, whether it's a 1 hour assessment or whether it's a whole day's assessment. You know, back in the 1980s, there was a big fad around this thing called assessment centers. I think virtual reality may allow us to go back to that again sometime soon. But it's about putting people in a scenario which is as realistic as it possibly can be, getting them to demonstrate that they've actually not only got the skill, but the willingness and the behavioural attributes to do the job. I get a lot of clients who kind of pull their noses up at that to some degree, and they may have a belief in, you know, the value of their induction program, their training program, and their playbook. And that will help some people. However, there's a little phrase that I like to use, and that is that it doesn't matter how much training you give to a donkey, it's never going to win the Melbourne Cup.
Yeah,
right?
100%.
Looks like a horse, eats what a horse eats, drops stuff out the back end like a horse does, probably really, really wants to be a horse boss, but it can't. It's not a horse, it's a donkey.
Yeah. So how would you, like, I guess it comes back to that classic complementary business of, like, you need the systems, the frameworks, the structure, the process, but you need the right people as well. One can't offset the other, because I suppose if you've got the right, as you said, using the words like playbook or process or systems in place or visibility in terms of dashboarding or metrics or anything like that, you can have the best things set up on that level. But if you've got the wrong person, then you're kind of not going to get very far. Or the flip side of that, which is really interesting, is that you get to a certain degree. If you've got a gun salesperson in, you get to a good point, but often that works as a crutch because, or this is what I say anyway, it'd be good to get your thoughts on it, but you get to a point where you've got a good salesperson, they're able to kind of hit the ground running and utilize their IP from their previous experience and their own confidence and ability in sales that they've crafted over the years. But what happens is then you're kind of at a point where you've relied on that person too much, and you're at massive risk if they leave, or you need to hire other salespeople, or you don't want to be as kind of involved in sales but still want to maintain responsibility. You don't have anything in place to support that, and you very quickly end up in hot water. And if that person turns around and quits tomorrow or demands more money, and you say no, and then they leave, it's just like, well, what have you got to actually have an asset within the business as the intellectual property of the sales part of the business that's unique to what it is about selling your product or service to your clients and understanding that particular market? Like, do you have that? Because if you don't have that and they leave, you're in a very kind of challenging spot. And that's where we see a lot of the time where we're kind of, we're engaged in basically not only the de-risking, not only it's scaling up, but it's also de-risking, because otherwise you can very quickly get caught out.
So talk us through a bit more of that. And one of the things that you said a little earlier, and I laughed because I absolutely get it, is that the notion of the extroverted salesperson who can talk underwater with a mouthful of marbles. Right?
Yeah.
It's the classic stereotypical view of the salesperson, and it's that view that a lot of people are kind of repulsed by, including myself. As a quick aside, I'm a few thousand words into writing a business book at the moment. It's called The S Myth, and Why Small Business Owners Must Master the Art and Science of Sales. And the opening line of the book is,
me actually saying to my, at the time, business partner, Glenn Dobson, and he and I co-owned a business called the Kona Group, which is a sales training business. But we stepped out of a business meeting, stepped into the elevator, and I turned to Glenn and I said, mate, I don't want to be in sales. I don't want to do this sales crap, right? You do all this thing. I'll write the programs and deliver. I hate this selling thing. And so I ended up developing a bit of a phobia about what it meant to be a salesperson, right? So you've got the stereotypical character thing.
Yeah.
Then the other piece that you threw in, of course, is your bag, that area that you specialize in, and that it's around the numbers and the metrics and the measurements and the dashboards and things of that nature. And so, you also hear that sales is a numbers game.
Yes.
Right? Talk to us more about your experience around the numbers game stuff.
Well, I think where do you start? Where do you start in terms of that? I think what's really interesting is that as kind of, to use that term, extroverted salesperson versus introverted salesperson, to kind of group or personify two kind of sides of it. I think what's really interesting as an introverted salesperson is there's that thing in the back of your mind, whether you're kind of starting out in sales, whether you've been doing sales for decades, or whether you're somewhere in between, where it's like, I want to make sure that I'm coming from a place of integrity. I want to make sure that I'm being transparent and honest. I want to make sure that I'm genuinely understanding this person's needs and pain points or frustrations before I actually present a solution to them, or offer them the opportunity for us to engage together, to work together and achieve some sort of an outcome. And a mentor of mine reminds me all the time, he's like, the fact that you're thinking that constantly and concerned about that is reflective of the fact that you're most likely not going to do that, because there's plenty of people out there in sales, as we all know, which kind of taints the name of sales and the game of sales, that it's kind of like everyone's afraid of ripping people off or pushing a product and not really understanding someone or miscommunicating something. And I think that's kind of a key piece. It's like that genuine concern for wanting to make sure that you're doing the right thing by someone is a real, really powerful, strong quality of the introverted salesperson. And I think as well, like you've got, especially like an introverted salesperson is someone who's typically going to embrace a process because they don't have as much confidence out there talking. So they're not making it up as much. Versus an extroverted salesperson is often relying on their natural aptitude or ability to communicate and build a rapport with someone, and then kind of share and excite that person through the vision or what they're saying, and building massive trust. And I think the distinction either way is that, again, you need to have that rapport as a salesperson. And when you're hiring salespeople and looking at salespeople and coaching salespeople, it's like understanding that they're able to build rapport is incredibly important, because we are humans after all, and we need to build trust. And at the same time, there needs to be a process, because the amount of, like, a classic example is like a business like a dental practice that's got a receptionist. Now, what blows my mind every time is your classic like receptionist or admin person or customer service person who's essentially in a sales role without realizing, where the business owner, the CEO, the managing director doesn't necessarily frame it like that person, nor do they actually see it that way. And also the person in that role doesn't see it that way or frame it that way. And so they're picking up the phone, answering a call, and the amount of times like it's paid advertising, paid marketing dollars being spent on people calling in as well, or they're following up with someone, they're calling out to someone that new leads has come through or referral. And it's just like, it's transactional. It's not understanding the client. It's not framing the call and instilling confidence. It's not guiding them towards a particular outcome that person's actually after. It's not building trust. It's like, it's all the red crosses. And it's that distinction between a transactional conversation where you're asking the facts and figures. You're asking how many of, like, for example, like, I don't even know what's an example, like a cleaning company, like how many bedrooms have you got on a transactional level versus, so there are a gazillion cleaning companies out there. Why'd you call us? Like, how can we stood out to you? What's going on for you right now that makes cleaning a priority right now? Not last week, not next year, like why right now? And that's probably a terrible example, but you get the point. It's like, it's really diving deeper into the meaning and the essence of why they're actually reaching out to you in the first place and connecting with them there. And the moment you can start to build a sales framework around that, and then build sales systems off the back of that, and off the back of that, sales metrics, and then the visibility, and then bringing the right people, whether you've got them and you kind of introduce and help get them to help mold that ecosystem, or whether you're hiring off the back of that to really make sure that aligns either way. And that's kind of the evolution, because it's like, it's repositioning. It's not just bringing in a system or a person or metrics or a new sales process. It's repositioning the essence of what sales means in that business. Yeah. And then building the ecosystem of IP that becomes an asset around that. And I kind of went on a bit of a tangent then, but hopefully that kind of speaks to a few other points.
Yeah, absolutely. And let's go into the metrics just for a moment.
Yeah.
Because I know it's the bugbear of lots of salespeople. This whole notion of either I'm having to waste time putting numbers into something.
Yeah.
Whereas I really want to be out there having conversations and selling.
Yeah.
Or the other side of it, and that is that it's creating a level of visibility into what I am or am not doing.
Yeah.
Yeah. What are your thoughts on that? I mean, is
that
resistance still?
Well, it's so common, but what I put it down to is the culture or the essence of sales, and how that's driven from a leadership perspective. Because if the leader of the business or the leader of the sales team, or if it's just a smaller business and there is no salesperson and they're doing it themselves, if they're not embracing that culture of being able to really drive sales, and it comes back to the cornerstone of what we're talking about scaling sales side of the business, that's where that comes unstuck, because then you've got fragmentation or a level of disjointedness, where on one level they want to increase sales, but on another level there's not that drive to really drive like use of systems or focus on certain metrics or execution of particular strategies that are really complementary to improving the sales results and sales activity, and then measuring that off the back of that. And so that's the distinction. Like a business where the leader is incredibly committed and will do whatever it takes to help enable the team and build the asset in the business and in the systems and infrastructure, versus a leader that doesn't. That's the biggest distinction. Because systems are great, anything in that kind of system side, framework, processes, etc. That's all great, but it's meaningless if it's not driven by the leader, as is, I'm sure, from a people side. Like, what do you see in that spot, the influence of a leader in terms of in relation to the success or failure?
100%. It's like almost anything in a business. If you want your people to adopt a new particular practice or a way of behaving, or you want them to stop doing something or other, then it has to come from the person in the leadership role. There's just no doubt about that. And if their mentality is, not in alignment with the things that are going to assist, then obviously that's going to detract. I think though, for salespeople more so, it's around this measurement thing. I mean, sales is one of the most measured functions in any business, probably outside of finance. I mean, finance obviously is almost entirely about measuring things.
Yes.
But the sales folks feel as though they're under a huge amount of scrutiny, and there's questions around comfort and discomfort around that. A number of years ago, I think it was in the leadership business, I had a couple of occasions where some of the sales people had come to me and basically had approached me with a request for a pay rise, a base pay rise. To which my response was quite simply, yeah, sure thing. How much do you want? Which kind of shocked them a little bit. They weren't expecting to have that response from me. That wasn't benevolent. I kind of figured they were probably going to come to me at some stage. So I'd say, how much do you want? And they'd say, another 10? 10? Really? Is that all? How about another?
That's the essence of sales, isn't it? You want them to sell you on why you need to invest more in them to deliver based on the commensurate with the value.
Yeah, well, there's that, but it was also then back down to metrics. It's quite, listen, if you want to make another 20 grand this year, I'm more than happy to help facilitate that happen. Let's talk
about the numbers. Yeah.
How well do you do numbers? How many more dials do you need to make?
Yeah, exactly. And I think just to speak to that point, it's like so many businesses are focused on the output. It's like, what was the revenue generated? What's the cash in the bank? What's the number of sales or clients or customers brought on board, or whatever that needs to look like? And then on the leads level, you've got on a marketing level, you're generating leads and what the leads look like. And I describe it as like this black hole in between lead, opportunity, referral, inquiry through to sale, customer, revenue, of like this black hole of just all this stuff pours in and not the whole lot comes back out, because you've got very little understanding on a measurable, objective level on what that looks like. And I'm a big believer in the work that we do around keeping that lean, because you can go over the top and there's plenty of ways to do that in a really complicated way. But businesses more and more in this age, especially with the advancement of technology, are looking for simple, lean solutions or ways of approaching it in terms of measuring and tracking, especially on a sales level, that allows them to move quickly still, not be bogged down by admin time. Still, yes, you still have to input some level of data. There has to be some interaction between the person and the system. But that's kind of keeping it incredibly agile or lean, in the sense of being able to allow the salesperson to refocus their energy and utilize the data that's coming from this objective database or stockpile of information that's invaluable if presented in the right way, or understood in the right way, but then also get back to what they're doing best. And I think the key piece comes down to, how do we measure the key elements of that journey, of that process, from inquiry, from lead through to sale, and ensure that each of those milestones or steps along the process are measured to some degree. Because then, if you're not getting the output you want, you can reverse engineer it back to the front. And if it's the number of leads that you need because your conversions are excellent along those however many steps, then perfect, get more leads. But if it's the conversion, which is typically the bigger problem and the more likely and common problem, then at what point in the conversion, and how can you improve that? Because the amount of time that people get downstream, and by downstream I mean further along in the process, closer subjectively to the sale, but it's like actually that person is consuming a lot of time, a lot of resources. They might have sent a lot of proposals or had lots of sales conversations or whatever business you're in. And it's like, if you actually objectively viewed them based on some level of qualification and better qualified them early on and better framed with them around what level of expectation was or what that looked like in terms of moving through that process with them, and also got that some degree of micro commitments along the way, then you're not going to get them downstream where there are a lot of noise, or they ghost you, to use that word, in terms of the follow-up process, and disappear. Now, obviously, you're going to get that, but in sales, the more you can reduce that and increase conversion, even if it's only marginal, even if it's only a few % across each of the steps in the process, that is what results in exponential results, because it's compounding. It's not just 5% here, 5% there, therefore 10%. It's actually compounding. It's a multiplier along that process. And that, being able to track that in a simple way, that's incredible for results.
There's a formula that I've used in all of my business in terms of where I want the salespeople focused, and it's a really simple formula. We call it QDQ, right? And it's quantity, direction, quality. How many conversations are you having? Quantity. Yes. Who are you having those conversations with? Are you actually speaking with the ideal target for us? And then are you speaking to the ideal people within that ideal target? So that's direction. And then quality. What's the quality of the conversation you're having? And I've seen a shift in expectation around the last Q over recent time, because with the advent of social and just online in general, Google My Business and customer ratings and all that kind of stuff. The prospects today can do so much in advance of then saying, okay, send a salesperson to see me.
Yeah.
They've done,
Yes. It's a far more educated buyer, 100%. Yeah.
Are there any kind of magic formulas that you tend to subscribe to? Are there any key 4 or 5 things that you suggest to a business owner are really imperative for them to measure?
I think one of the key things that comes to mind is being able to segment your prospects or your database. And this kind of aligns with the qualifying side of it. And this isn't a specific overall metric. I'll come back to that. But just briefly, the moment you can know where on the journey they are, especially speaking to your point around that more educated buyer and that typically do more research and a more informed part of talking with you, like what I find really powerful is the moment you can allow them to self-identify as a particular type of prospect or at a particular point in the buying process, and then and then kind of capture that data, that becomes incredible, because then you've got a really easy way of saying, all right, of all the people that came through that landed at this point in the funnel or came through at the sales process and maybe move really quickly. They were qualified really quickly and move through quickly. It's like if you're segmenting them based on a particular tag or type of client or size of client or revenue or how big their team is or whatever the other qualifiers are that you use, then you've got a really easy way of saying, all right, well, this type of client based on this particular level of qualification, that gives us this outcome versus that other type of client gives us this outcome. Now, maybe either way, like maybe one's better than the other, but at least you know the data. And I suppose just further to that, another way that becomes incredibly relevant is on a metrics level, so many people are spending so much money on marketing in an attempt to think, all right, well, 50% of my marketing is working. I just don't know which half. It's that classic like cliche or quote. And it's just like, you might have a great number of leads. Like maybe you're spending $10,000 a month and getting, I don't know, 10,000 leads, say. Maybe 80% of those leads are coming, just to use Facebook and Google ads as two examples. Maybe 80% of the leads are coming from Facebook ads and only 20% are coming from Google, for example, from the paid side of things. But maybe 80% of your revenue is coming from Google versus 20% from Facebook, and maybe it's in reverse. But where it comes unstuck for most businesses is they don't have that level of attribution from revenue back to marketing, and from revenue in terms of size of revenue, in terms of what exactly they're purchasing, back through the channel they came through, in addition to some of these qualifiers or ways of segmenting. And I see that as a really distinct way of on a metric level. We want to see that. We want to know, like, that's just another layer beneath of saying, all right, well, these are the sales we're getting. And it's the insight, ultimately. It's the insight to say, who's our client? How do we know them more on an objective level using the data we've got so that we understand them to an even greater degree and can refine our marketing, can refine the way we're approaching them and conversing with them on a sales level. And yeah, I don't know if I really answered your question, but they're just some of the key points on a metric level. It's like, what's the revenue attribution for this channel of marketing versus this channel of marketing? And then the conversions across each step in the process at a high level.
You've actually just reminded me of two things. A conversation that I actually had with somebody only last week, his business partner who are of my vintage. Unfortunately referred to their marketing department as the colouring in department.
Okay.
Their disdain for marketing is unfortunate.
Sure.
But probably the more important thing to kind of take away from what you've just said is, again, it's one of those somewhat cliched terms, but I think it's even more true today because it's more possible today. And that is, if you can't measure it, you cannot manage it.
100%. Yeah.
And, you know, for me, in the recruitment side of the game, same deal, you know, and conscious of our time. So we might kind of use this as a bit of our kind of wrap up.
Yeah, perfect.
For me, recruitment today is much, much more about measuring, rather than relying on good old-fashioned gut feel.
Love it. Yeah.
Science is absolutely proving today that gut feel is wrong.
Yeah. Yes. And gut feel is ultimately you stuck in business. It's relying on your gut feel. You can't sell that. You can't, if you want to exit the business at some point, you can't scale gut feel either. So yeah, I think at the end of the day, whether it's in recruitment, whether it's in the sales kind of system, sales operations side of the business, either way, it's the metrics, because that gives you scalability, that gives you objective data and insight, that gives you a way to measure what happened to then go back to what you did in the first place and reassess, readjust, reposition, re-strategize around what needs to happen moving forward. And it sounds so simple, but at the end of the day, the more you can do something, measure it, assess the result, and then readjust, it's such an incredibly simple model that everyone has heard, but everyone's kind of gets further and further from that in the chaos of business. And the more you can come back to that and having the right infrastructure, the right approaches on the recruitment side, that to me is where the magic happens.
Fantastic. So there you have it, folks, from Cullen and I. If you can't measure it, you can't manage it. If you can't manage it, you can't scale it.
100%. Love it, James. Thank you so much.
My pleasure, mate. Been great chatting with you. Hopefully we'll do this again sometime soon, yeah?
Perfect.
Alrighty.